Go. Welcome to today's Expert Chat. I'm Ginny with the Understood team, and today we'll be talking about stress, anxiety, and emotions. With us today is Dr. Jerry Schultz, a clinical neuropsychologist, and he'll be talking about the topic, Too Stressed to Learn, How Emotions Can Affect Learning. Welcome, Jerry. How are you today?
I'm great, Ginny. Thanks for having me back on.
It's great to have you. So before we get started, Jerry, can you tell our viewers a little bit more about your background?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I started out my professional career as a special education teacher many years ago, and by a lot of good luck, I was at the right place at the right time and morphed from that illustrious beginning into a clinical neuropsychologist, which I am today. Along the way, I've run a couple of clinics for charged with the diagnosis and treatment of kids with learning and attention issues. I've been a consultant to school districts across the country. I'm a frequent speaker on the topic of stress and the impact on cognition and behavior. And I currently hold a position at Harvard Medical School where I'm working with Dr. Nadine Gabb in the Gabb Lab looking at brain function in little babies who might grow up to have learning disabilities.
Oh, that's so interesting. All right, so Jerry, I want to say that I've seen you do some presentations, and it's wonderful, so we're so fortunate to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
And for our viewers, Dr. Schultz will be taking your questions throughout the chat, so just type them into the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can. With that, Jerry, let's get started. A very basic question. Is stress ever normal or healthy?
It's a good place to start, Ginny. If we didn't have stress or our ability to respond to stress, we wouldn't exist as a species. So stress is above all a protective mechanism that keeps us safe from harm. So the question is can stress ever be normal or healthy? The answer is yes, and it should be. Stress is supposed to have, our reaction to stress is supposed to happen quickly. It's supposed to protect us from danger, allow us to have the physiological and psychological ability to respond to danger and get out of its way. The problem is sometimes stress becomes toxic. That is, it's too big, too bad, and it lasts for too long. And when it does that, it can have a negative effect on our behavior and actually change the way our brain functions. So good stress is really good. Toxic stress is something we want to avoid.
Okay, important. Great. So when it comes to kids with learning and attention issues, Dr. Schultz, how can stress and I've heard you use the expression, how can it take a front seat to learning in the lives of students with learning and attention issues?
Well, everybody operates with a certain level of stress, the daily stress of daily living. And kids with learning and attention problems aren't immune from those at all either. But on top of that, kids with attention problems and learning difficulties often have neurologically based differences that make life particularly challenging for them. So they not only have to deal with the general issues of stress, what to wear, how am I looking, who are my friends, those kinds of things, but also the problems with attention and learning that add to that stress. What happens is that puts a lot of kids in school where they're experiencing frustration and often failure more often than they're experiencing success and happiness and that joy that comes from competence. When we're under that kind of chronic stress, our brain, the protective parts of our brain start to go into high gear. And when that happens, it's a good thing because it's trying to protect us. But what happens when the stress parts of our brain go into high gear, the attention parts of our brain, the parts of our brain that are responsible for the so-called executive functions, take a back seat because we don't need them when we're in danger. We don't need to think about danger. We need to get out of its way. So it's a reactive, reflexive response. So that's why stress sometimes takes the driver's seat and cognition and learning goes to the back of the room, if you will.
So definitely kids with learning and attention issues are more vulnerable.
I think so, to an extent, especially when they don't understand what causes their difficulties and what they can do about them. Then they're very vulnerable to the impact of negative stress.
So you're saying that some sort of a demystification of the issues that they're facing is an important component in order to cope with their stress and anxieties?
Yeah, I think clearly if kids don't have a good understanding of how their brains work, about the beneficial and negative impact of stress, even at a very early age, we can do this. They tend to come up with explanations that are not healthy and not helpful. They tend to retreat rather than move forward toward a challenge with the I can attitude that really allows them to be successful. So education about brain function, neuroscience, even for very little ones, is really important for them to understand, because then they can take control of it, because you can.
Yeah, okay, that's a really important point. What are some of the ways that kids with learning and attention issues might cope with stressful events, that are not so good for them?
Well, there are a lot of kids in the country who are under stress. Not only are those with learning or attention challenges. So the more they can learn how to self-calm, the better they are. In other words, kids have to understand what it means or what it feels like to be stressed. And sometimes they need to be taught that. We don't get born knowing what it feels like to be under stress. We kind of learn what that means. So when kids are taught when they have sweaty palms, when their breathing gets shallow, when their face gets red, when their pupils dilate, when they have stomach aches, when they feel like they want to run away, when they feel like they can't cope, they need to understand that those behaviors, those functions may be a part of stress. And when they do, they can then say, I'm feeling stressed, which really means I feel the effects of being stressed in a way that I can't handle. So they need to know that. They need to be taught what it feels like to have that uncomfortable ickiness that you feel when you're under stress, and then what to do about it and how to take control over it.
All right. And then in the schools, do you think that a lot of kids that are under stress, feeling stress, could be misunderstood?
Absolutely. A lot of adults do not understand even in themselves the symptoms of stress. When we start getting short-tempered with someone we care about and love, and we get snippy with them, sometimes we don't even think about that as a reaction to stress. And when we do, we can sometimes gain a greater sense of control. By the same token, there are a lot of people in schools, as smart and talented as they are, who have not yet learned about the impact of stress and its impact on cognition and behavior. And what they see are behaviors and the end result of stress not dealt with well. And they start focusing on changing those behaviors as opposed to looking at the possibility that stress might be at the root of these behaviors.
Right. So even disciplinary issues can come up when they're kind of displaced, right? They're not really targeting, the behavior or the function of the behavior.
It at least has to be on the checklist as a possibility. Otherwise, if you try to discipline a child who's backed in a corner by stress, you'll get a worse reaction from the discipline than the problem you had in the first place. And then you start layering consequences on top of consequences, and the child gets buried all in that. And I would say in many, if not most cases, if you drill down, you'll find out that stress or anxiety is at the root of most of these negative behaviors that we see in kids in school.
Very interesting. Jerry, I've heard you speak about the debilitating cycle of fear, stress, and failure for kids with learning disabilities, learning and attention issues. Can you explain more about that cycle, and can you offer some suggestions for even breaking that cycle?
Sure.
Is there hope for our kids?
There's always hope. If I didn't believe we had hope for our kids, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. It's what gives me joy in my professional life, because I know we can do something about this. That fear cycle that you talked about is really important to understand. The first part of it is fear. Something happens to you. In the olden days, it might have been a saber-toothed tiger at the opening of our cave. Now it could be something as simple as a difficult-looking reading passage for kids in school. The fear response is the same, whether it's a tiger or something that we feel we don't have any control over, like reading, if we have reading challenges. So the first thing you can do about that is to have kids kind of identify their reaction to certain things. So let's say a kid doesn't feel like she does very well in math. So you come up with a hierarchy that says, here's a picture of a math problem. Does that make you feel uncomfortable? Well, just a little. Okay, let's give that a rating of 2. And here's a picture of a kid doing a multi-step division problem. Does that create any anxiety? Oh, yeah, says the student. That could be me. Well, let's give that a 4 rating. And here's a picture I took of you doing a math problem. What does that do for you? The kid says, that reminds me of school. That makes me totally freak out. Well, let's give that what number would you give that? Well, let's make that a 12. And so the kid kind of makes a fear hierarchy. And that the secret to intervention is moving down that hierarchy till you get to a level where the kid feels comfortable. That is, here is a math problem sitting before you that you can do or you can choose not to do. How much anxiety does that produce? Nothing. I don't have to do it. Takes the problem away. So you give that a 0. Now what if I ask you to do it? What happens? Well, it's a pretty simple problem. It's only 1. I could probably do it. I'd give it an anxiety rating of 1. So you get a kid back down to a level where he or she is feeling pretty competent and confident, which fights fear, and then allows the child to move ahead. So when a child's confronted with a fear invoking or inducing stimulus, we have to figure out how to take out the toxicity in that. So if it's a whole book, if you say, read this book, that's a 20 on a 10-point scale. That's, oh, no, I can't do that. But if you say, here's a book by Learning Ally that you can listen to for 15 minutes, that's a much lower fear stimulus. That's the first part. So kids can learn to monitor and modulate the fear level, and we control the environment that helps them do that. If we don't do that, and they're scared, one of the things that happens is their body and their brains are reacting to me, saying, something frightening just happened to me. It's a saber-toothed tiger at the mouth of my cave. I need to escape. Well, in school, they can't escape because they're in a classroom, the door is closed, and a lot of kids try. They hide under the desk, they run, they try to get out of the situation. So if we know that fear is a factor in this response and we're controlling the environment with kids, we may say, it looks like you're showing some of those signs that this is making you feel anxious. What can you do right now to calm yourself down? I don't know, says the kid. And the teacher says, well, how about those deep breathing exercises that we practice? How about closing your eyes and imagining that happy place that you go to when you meditate? Might that work? Yes. And the teacher can also say, what can I do? Or a parent can say, what can I do to help you feel more comfortable? And the kid may say, just don't stand so close to me. Back off. Get out of my, give me 5 minutes. So you create what I call an oasis of tranquility for the kid, so the kid's stress level can come back down. Stress goes up real fast and it goes back down a little more slowly once you've dealt with it. So fear happens, then the reaction to run away happens, and then what we have to do is teach kids coping skills to allow them to deal with the thing that makes them scared. When like Navy SEALs go into a foreign nation to solve a problem, they go in with the highest level of stress you can imagine. But because they learn the coping skills that let them fight the danger and have the confidence to know that they can conquer it, they're still scared. But the level of fear they have is a readiness kind of fear. It's not a debilitating fear. It helps them do their job. That's the kind of place we want our kids to be in. We want them operating on what I call the cusp of their competence. Hard enough to be a challenge, but not so hard that it induces fear and shuts their brains down and makes learning harder. Otherwise, they are looking for the exit sign. They have, as my book title says, nowhere to hide. They go to the nurse's room, they get sick, they don't come to school, they fight the teacher, they argue, and you see this whole litany of behaviors that goes back to that cycle of the fear-initiating stimulus.
Wow.
That's in a big nutshell, a coconut shell, how I see it.
That makes incredible sense, Jerry. I love that you said that competence fights fear. And I also thought it was really interesting what you said about maybe the teacher or even the adult saying, what can I do to help? That's really useful.
We tend to, as adults, come in and try to fix problems. I know I'm guilty of that in my own life. Something's broken, you move in to fix it. But two things that really are very helpful and respectful is to say to a child, what can you do to help yourself? That says a lot of things. It says, I believe you have the ability to do this. If the kid is totally clueless, it means then we as adults have to teach those coping skills. And then the next respectful question is, how can I help you? And the kid may say, I don't need any help. You just, I'm good. Or I want you to stay right next to me. And that's okay too, but it can't be forever, but it could be for now, because the kid is saying, that anchors me, that makes me feel successful.
Right. Being safe is what it's about.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. All right, we have several viewer questions coming in, Jerry, so I'm going to jump right over. Kay Ramirez, how do you teach a child to deal with stress? For example, her son had a meltdown 2 weeks ago, and she interpreted it as being defiant. However, she found out he was just overwhelmed because a day or before, because after a day of before care, school, and after care, we attended curriculum night and then tried to do homework. So I think Mom came to realize that maybe it was an overwhelming day. So how do you teach a child to deal with stress? Or how do you work with a parent that is dealing with meltdowns as defiance when it's really a reaction to stress?
Right. Well, congratulations to this mom for thinking that it might be stress. There might be something going on. Too often we have a knee-jerk reaction to the behavior. And we say, we think that's rude. How could you do that? That's disrespectful. And therefore you will have some consequences or you'll be punished. It totally misses the mark. So an enlightened parent says, let me just think about what this day or this hour or this activity looks like through the eyes of my child. And a real question is, how much control does he or she have over the events that have just happened? Now, this kid in this situation didn't have much control. There was the before school, the after school, the parents' night, the homework. There's very little this kid has control over. So a parent has to have, I think, has the responsibility and the obligation to say, wow, there's way too much on your plate. I have to have the courage sometimes to say, you won't do that. It could be saying, tonight you get a pass for homework. And an enlightened teacher may give two passes to a kid every grading period to say, take these home to your parents. And if you feel like you're so stressed you can't do it, all you have to do is hand them one of these tokens, keep it in your drawer, and use it. You only get two, so use it wisely. But give it to your parents. That means they can back off. You can leave the homework alone. Because you're too stressed, you'll do the work tomorrow. We're not going to let you off the hook. But that night, you may need something else, like sleep. So here's a kid who's up late, worrying about homework, not sleeping. It's a setup. So congrats, Mom, for thinking about your kid this way. What you can do to help your kid deal with stress is, what I'm saying is, the first thing you have to do as an adult who has more control over the environment is to try to set some limits for it. So your kid has a long day at school. So instead of picking your kid at the end of school, come 10 minutes early. Call the teacher, text the teacher and say, I'm coming in. We've got a really busy day today. I'm going to take my kid over for an ice cream cone before we go to this next activity. I've got to give him an oasis of tranquility, a place of peace. You have some control over that. And it's important for parents to realize they may have to step in and put the brakes on all this stuff that kids are asked to do or expect the behaviors that they get.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Jerry. All right, so M.E. asks you for examples on how to teach a child about how their brain works. And I guess she includes based on age or developmental level.
Yeah. I wish I had at my fingertips resources or references for you to go to, but there are some, and I don't. But I would tell you that, and maybe the Understood website has pieces that they'll tell you about like this, but there are videos that are made just for kids that are designed for use in science classes that show these great animated shows about what happens to the brain, how it functions, and how it functions under stress. So again, I apologize. I should have something at my fingertips to send you to, but I don't. That's really one really good way. Also ask the children's librarian in the library if they have a book that explains how the brain works. Because when kids understand it, it's magical. The power they have over their own thinking, their own behavior, if they understand it comes from a part of their body over which they have some control, it's really, really a powerful lesson to learn.
Right. Okay. Great. So, check Understood for resources and check other, websites for those kinds of resources too. And we can talk more about that, Dr. Schultz. Yep. Okay, great. Ace would like to know some examples of self-soothing techniques for elementary age students.
Good question. and may be different for different kids. Some kids who are highly anxious throughout a great part of their day may have a self-calming box or a container filled with things that the child has identified as things that make me feel better, things that make me feel calm. Could be fuzzy animals, could be squeeze toys, could be springy kinds of things. I don't want to say fidget spinners because that just drives me crazy. I think that's a whole other webinar, but it could be for some kids. But things that the kid identifies, and even if it is a fidget, I make a side. If this kid says, "Oh, I want a fidget spinner," that kid has to demonstrate that using a fidget spinner is something that calms him or her down and makes him feel more relaxed. If it doesn't do that and there's not visible evidence, put it back in a box and hide it away somewhere. The other thing, kids, exercise is a great, I want to say relaxer. Exercise, regular physical exercise every day helps kids create the brain chemicals that their brain needs to think better and to help them relax, and it fights the chemical reaction that you get, the hormonal reaction you get under stress. So those are good chemicals fighting against chemicals that kind of get out of whack. Proper nutrition is really important. What kids put into their bodies creates different chemical stews in their brains. So they have to have a good mix of the right kind of foods and stay away from sugar and stay away from things that you know are not good for brains or bodies. Warm milk at night is a classic. If kids aren't allergic to milk, they can have something like that. Warm baths at night do that. Giving kids toys or things that contain them a little more. Even pulling a blanket or a towel around yourself to tighten yourself together to really literally wrap yourself up is good. Playing soft music, having your kids learn to close their eyes and be comfortable with that. Deep breathing exercises. All the activities that come out of the mindfulness movement that is designed to help kids get more in touch with what they're thinking and how they're feeling, all those things. And modeling it yourself. If you're an anxious parent or an anxious teacher around a kid, that pick it up like a dog picks up scared people, and we know what that's like. So we have an obligation to really say to kids, here's what it looks like when you're calm. A lot of kids don't know what that feeling is. So you say, honey, you need to calm down. They don't know. They really have to be led into that state, and it has to be consciously labeled as you are calm, you are cool, you are relaxed, whatever language is appropriate. And it has to happen in different ways in different stages of development. Older kids, you ask them what they do to calm themselves down, and then you just simply suggest that this is a time to do that thing. Okay?
Yes, great advice. All right, so JH has decided to homeschool her 10-year-old this year, largely because of stress. He's less stressed out now, but she's worried about whether she's doing enough to help him with coping skills, because the hope is that he would go back into the classroom. So are there resources to help this parent learn more about coping skills, how to help teach your child better coping skills for future?
Yeah, it's a good way to ask the question. The more coping skills we have, the less anxious we are when we encounter stressors in life. Doesn't matter what we're doing. I think the practice and the fact that this parent has made the choice to homeschool her child because of stress is an interesting and wise choice for some kids, because it takes them off this train that's moving very fast over which parents have little control. The key is, if you're homeschooling your child, it's really important to keep your kid at what I've said before, at the cusp of competence, where the work is just hard enough that makes it exciting and challenging, but not so hard that it swamps the kid. It's like if you're trying to teach somebody how to swim, you want to make sure, and they're afraid of swimming, afraid of deep water, you want to make sure that their feet are on the bottom of the pool before you even talk to them about the task of swimming, that they're walking around in the water, getting used to it. If you're talking about math or reading or science or whatever it is, you let them walk around in water that's low enough for them to feel comfortable, but not insulting to them, And then slowly you ask them how much more they can tolerate. You can say, for example, if you're doing reading and you're reading a certain reading level, you say, this is the next level of reading difficulty, and this is the next level of reading difficulty. You know that your kid could probably handle the next one or even the next one, but you let the kid choose which one. So if the kid chooses the higher level, it's good for his self-concept because he's picking something that he believes to be more difficult, and you've set it up so that the water's not going to go over his head. He will still be able to swim. He feels good. The human brain likes success. So when you think about where do I go to learn about coping skills, the best way to teach coping skills is to put a kid at a level at which she's coping. Let her bask in the glow of that feeling that she has, and then ask her how much more. If she's not sure how much more she should take, it's okay to say, I think you could handle this level. And if she handles it well, you ask her how she felt about it before you say, that's wonderful, I'm so proud of you. You get kids to self-evaluate because they put these in their suitcases and they take them through the rest of their lives. If they get all their external evaluation or valuation from another adult, they learn to look for that. And that doesn't strengthen them at all. That just teaches them how to live in other people's judgment. You can tell I'm passionate about this. I could go on for days, but that's my coconut shell size response.
Yeah, no, I love what you had to say, Jerry. I love your metaphors and your analogies. It makes things really crystal clear. Thank you. Yeah. So Lori writes that her 16-year-old is being treated for anxiety and ADHD, but does not let the parents help at all. And it comes across as defiance. When she meets with the doctor, she tells the doctor everything is fine. She's not really opening up to anyone. And her stress comes in physical ailments, tummy aches mainly, even shoulder pain. So what advice do you have for this parent?
Well, first of all, you're dealing with a 16-year-old, and just take away the stress factor, you're dealing with a 16-year-old. So there's a lot of that behavior is explained by the drive for striving for independence and saying, I want to be my own person, you can't be the boss of me, kind of thing. So a 16-year-old should be saying, I don't need you involved in my life, until they do. But some kids carry that to an extreme, and they get oppositional, they get defiant. You have to think about how much you move into that kid's space that might create that reaction, because that defiant oppositional reaction usually does a pretty good job of pushing adults away. So it's purposeful. It serves a purpose. So stay back a little bit. I hate to use pet analogies, but if you deal with a pet who's been traumatized, if you go too close, you should expect it to reach out and snap at your hand. So you know that you stay just close enough to make the dog feel comfortable in your presence without intruding. It's the same trick to use with kids. So she goes to a therapist and says, everything's fine. And the therapist, if he or she is sensitive, probably says, glad to hear it. That's good. That's really good. And the therapist and you ought to look at the behaviors then that she exhibits, the stomach aches, the other symptoms, or the defensiveness or the oppositionality, and say, everything is fine. And I believe you and I respect you when you say that, because it's your life. But sometimes when kids do these behaviors, when they lash out at their parents, or when they really get these physical stomach aches or these shoulder aches, it may be because things aren't fine, and that's what's going on. When you're fine, your body is usually doing fine, and yours is not. You're reporting that. And you don't want the kid to shut down and stop making these physical complaints, because they're important markers. So you want to say, well, you've got these pains, and a pediatrician is a really good person, and the therapist is too, to say sometimes these pains are related to anxiety. You have to understand that. So the more you control your anxiety, the less likely it is you'll have these physical symptoms. You have some control over that. And if you remember my rule that control over life equals control over anxiety, it's a nice formula. But I would say to this 16-year-old or any other 16-year-old to say, you're having a pain now, you're having a stomach ache. Is there anything you can do to make that feel better? First of all, instead of coming in and saying, we need to get you to the doctor, we need to do something. Oh, no, you had that last time. Pay the child the respect, pay the adolescent the respect of saying, is there anything you can do to get control of this? It's more likely that she will say, I don't know. And then you can say, I have some ideas. Are you interested in them? Again, giving the child permission to ask you for help. The more you shove it in, the more likely the kid is to regurgitate it. So you want to get your kid, and if your kid's watching this, it's a trick, kid, but it works. It helps you, because they know it. But the idea is you want to get in there and have the child take responsibility for self-calming and doing some of those other kinds of things. Give her her space, but don't let her be alone or lonely to the point where it's dangerous or scary for her. So being alone and anxious is not a great thing. Being alone, being anxious with a parent who's worried about you is sometimes not a great thing. Get your kid involved in things that take her away from the anxiety. Go bowling. Do something unusual, weird. Cook with your kid if she'll let you. If she won't let you be with her, tell her that you're busy tonight and you'd like her to make dinner. If she's got a skill or a trait like playing music or even writing lyrics, let her do that. Let her shine in some area, because that puts money in her self-concept bank that helps reduce the anxiety.
Okay, great.
For now, that's it.
Yeah, no, yeah. Thank you, Jerry. We're running out of time. I do want to squeeze in one question because a few folks have asked it, and we also hear this in our community a lot. So when you have a child who enjoys sports, right? For example, here, I'm going to read this because it makes a lot more sense. Due to all the stress with homework, this is creating anxiety in terms of participating in sports, right? Of course, the sports would be great for her, but yet it's creating more anxiety. So how do you strike that balance, giving the child the exercise, and, outside activity that they need or crave, plus, the stress of extra homework, and for kids with learning and attention issues, that's even a bigger factor where homework is so much of a struggle many times.
Yeah. I'll try to be concise about this. A teacher or teachers may give a homework load that they think is reasonable for kids because most kids do it. For some kids who can't, they need to think about kids having different size homework plates so that if one teacher gives too much, it can spill over. If 3 teachers give a little, it can still spill over. So it's really important to have a discussion with your child's teachers about how much time they think it should take for your kid to do the work that they're giving to that kid at night. The other question you want to ask of the teachers is the work that you're sending home for homework work that my child can do independently, and do you have evidence of that? Because if you send her home with work that even she thinks she can't do independently, it's overwhelming to her. She calls me into her sphere of influence, and then she and I get into these struggles about it. I'm, as a parent, willing to help her, but if it's because you're sending her home, she's coming home with things that are really beyond her capacity level, that's not a good homework assignment. That's a stress-making assignment, and it's working very well for that. So have that dialogue with teachers. 3 teachers may not be talking to each other, and they may think each one of them is giving a reasonable amount, but they're giving more. If a teacher says, my homework should take no more than 15 minutes, and it's taking your child 20 minutes or 30 minutes, let your teacher know that, and then your teacher should be asked to set a limit on time, not amount of work, that your child spends on the homework. Get some control over the factors that seem like they're out of control for your daughter. In terms of sports, if she's going from sports from school to homework to a competitive sport that adds pressure, you might think about getting the exercise through less of a competitive sport or more of a sport where she can beat her personal best, like running, like swimming, beating time, but competing against herself, not making the social judgments that are inherent in some sports, the external judgment that kids get. Think about lower stress sports or sports that only stress your physical system, but not your psychological system. If she can't sleep at night, the absence of sleep is going to make stress more difficult for her. Parents need to think about shortening the amount of responsibility that kids have, making it smaller without insulting the kids' intelligence, as a way of protecting their kids from this stress. We control what we can control, and sometimes that takes some courage to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks for covering all the bases there, Jerry.
Sure.
So we've run out of time. Jerry, Dr. Schultz, thank you so much for being with us today, and it's always great to have you.
My pleasure. Hope to be back again soon.
Yep. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining. If you've missed any portion of this chat or you'd like to watch it again, we archive all of our chats at u.org/calendar. And if you have other questions, please join the Understood community at u.org/community. You can chat with other parents and Understood experts about issues you may be facing with your own kids. So thanks again for being with us today, and have a great afternoon.